In November of 2018, the World Federation of Therapeutic Communities decided to have its 2019 board meeting in Thessaloniki, Greece, in conjunction with the European Federation of Therapeutic Communities biannual conference. The World Federation also wanted to host a training institute and asked Naya Arbiter, Rowdy Yates, Kathleen Yates, and Rod Mullen to be trainers for the two-day institute under the auspices of Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. The institute was held on September 17th and 18th with 60 participants from across Europe, the Middle East, and Australia. The focus of the institute was for participants to have a better understanding of the therapeutic community modality from several perspectives. This series of edited videos captures some of the training provided and some of the interactions of the participants with the trainers. Kathleen Yates, a registered psychotherapist. Kathleen has worked in the UK National Health Service as a top-grade adult psychotherapist since 1990. Prior to this, she worked as a drama therapist with offenders both in and out of prison, as a mental health worker, therapist, in a street-based project for young people with mental health difficulties. She is a dynamically trained psychotherapist who has worked intensively with groups and individuals. Areas of expertise include work with people who have severe early adverse experience, substance dependence problems, persistent depressive illness, and post-traumatic difficulties. Since 2006, she has worked with the Advanced Intervention Services in Dundee, a university-based international service working with patients who suffer from treatment-refractory depression and obsessive-compulsive disorders. She is trained and experienced in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing and mentalization-based interventions.
A number of people have noted up in Southeast Asia that immediately after a disaster or major war, all the birds are silent. And people that support children to start playing, and often the first is water play, the sound of the play starts the birds chirping again.
Interesting. Yeah, that's lovely. That's really lovely.
So there was a moment there, my friend over here expressed it so beautifully, a moment of touching with something fairly basic to the work we do. Something very important about why we are here and why we do this work and how that work can extend out. Saying once again, it's about mutual aid, it's about community, it's about people helping each other. It's not about me. I am not the saviour of the community, or you are not. It is the community that works, that does the work. So talking about trauma is very important, and allowing people within the community to have that place where they can talk about trauma. Let me move this on. I don't know. I come from Scotland. That's Scotland. It's actually a moment of total eclipse taken on my iPhone from my back garden. Those are the kelpies in Scotland that were built. They're beautiful, beautiful. 2 horses. Now, okay, why do I show this? Because I just want to share it with you, something nice, something that I love, something that's worth seeing. And I love the way this horse and that horse, they're both aware of each other, they know each other's spaces, and one's looking up and one's looking down, but they both know each other's there. The kelpies in Falkirk in Scotland. So Now, so we're talking here about the therapeutic community, and again, saying this is that the therapeutic community is a mentalizing community. It helps people think. We as people, we're thought-generating machines. We will generate thoughts about a situation, but some of them will be erroneous. But we're programmed to do that. So the therapeutic community creates a social system where people are allowed to think without fear. Normal social systems create fear that destroys thinking, the shattered thinking capacity, and they force the system back into a pre-mentalistic mode of social thinking. Autocratic social systems are self-reinforcing, they're highly stable, they undermine the social mechanism that can alter their character. Collaboration. So, be it socialism or fascism, they become authoritarian systems and structures, and they undermine collaboration all the time because they just want a simple solution. The fascist solution, is it right or is it wrong? You're either for me or you're bad. You're out there. You will be objectified. And it's very important, and it follows. This is the psychological mechanism of what Naya was talking about. It follows. If you objectify people, they become the enemy, they've become the one you work on. And so we have to, within our therapeutic communities, work every day not to objectify our residents. They're people. So that's what that's about. Hands up somebody in each little group who would be prepared to say something in front of the whole group. Just quickly. What I'm going to ask you is to name 3 things that came up as things that you would avoid, shut down, find dangerous within the therapeutic community. Very quickly, I don't want...
Yeah. If there are threats, personal threats towards you.
Yes.
If there are people coming in who have been sexually abusive to others.
Sexual abusers.
Yeah. And the last one was staff not being able to keep the quality of the community.
We spoke about that. If you find a dead person in the community in the past.
Losing the focus of the community.
When the community forgets what it's about.
The other thing was a couple coming in the TC and dividing as well as the group as the staff members.
A couple.
A couple.
Yeah.
A man and a woman
Yes.
who were a couple before they came in. And they come in as a couple.
And did you all come up with antidotes? Sorry? Yes. Antidotes, the response.
Yeah, but it wasn't that easy to...
Good. But you thought about it.
Yes.
That's what we want. You thought about the antidote. So the therapeutic community is a mentalizing social system that provides sanctuary. TCs encourage thinking about feelings, verbalization about thoughts and feelings, interaction and creativity. A very small word about this, attachment theory, which comes from the work of Bowlby, who studied animal behaviours and saw that one of the primary things for people was an attachment to a loving care, for animals was an attachment to a loving caregiver. And he looked at this in animals and transferred this theory to human beings. And if you've done Psychology 101, you will all have done something about attachment theory. So, another piece of work that's very important in understanding of human beings and their need for love and attachment is the work that Harlow did with the monkeys. And what he found was that monkeys would choose, when they were held captive, to go rather to a soft, cuddly surface, to be soothed by that, rather than go to be fed by a wire bottle. So that tells us a lot about what human beings need from the very earliest point in their development. So all of the people that are coming into our communities will have an ocean of suffering in childhood, an ocean of it. Occasionally you will find people who don't have this experience, but it's very rare. These are the sorts of experiences they will have had in childhood. Now, it's easy to say them like this, and I'm kind of going in and out of it, and I'm kind of allowing you to objectify it. I'm kind of saying childhood sexual abuse, which objectifies it. But within the TC, the very last thing we want to do is objectify the person who has had that experience. Childhood sexual abuse is not a diagnosis, it's an experience that some people will have had. The worst thing in all my 40 years of doing this work was when I heard a young male psychologist say to a patient, or reported saying to a young woman, "Do you know you're the worst case of sexual abuse I have seen?" Where? You know, the patient in bed 14, the liver in bed 14, it's a patient. It's not a liver. It has a body attached to it. It has feelings. It has suffering. So we use these sorts of descriptions. We send people to specialists. This is what perhaps we're mandated to do more and more. Oh, you've been sexually abused. You must see the psychologist. Oh, you're cutting yourself. Go and see the psychiatrist. What you're saying to people is that at an ordinary human level, you can't cope. Well, you have to remember, it's a therapeutic community. Every person in that therapeutic community, all your residents, a lot of your demonstrators will have an ocean of suffering in childhood. And then in adulthood, that doesn't stop. I mean, the theory is, you know it all, Psychology 101. If you have had this dreadful experience, if you have been in the ocean of suffering in childhood, it doesn't stop when you grow up. You are vulnerable. You are the young woman who makes a relationship with the man who beats her and makes excuses for it, the man who rapes her. You are the young woman who goes out to get raped. You are the young woman who starts using drugs because thinking and feeling about what happened to you is too difficult. You can't do it because, do you know what? No one will listen. No one will want to know. So don't think for a moment you can bring these people into a therapeutic community and not listen to what happened to them. Because you can't. They won't heal. As Naya said earlier, also, you don't just want to hear the beginning of their story. You want to hear all their story. People will start by telling bits of the story. This happened. Now, if you say, oh, yeah, right, well, the group's finished. Okay, can we... Oh, so hot. That's the end of their story. You know? You shut the door. They put their foot over the threshold and you wouldn't help them in. You wouldn't. Now, how do you get, people are going to say, well, how do you get to be able to listen to this? And I know that one of the questions from yesterday was what about being overwhelmed? Within the TC, you have to apply the principles to yourselves. You have to create a listening staff, faculty, whatever you call yourself, group, who talk to each other about your days, who say, you know, that story really hurt me, that was so sore. That's what we say in Scotland, it was so sore. It really got in. And your colleagues can help you. You cannot work in a therapeutic community without seeing that it's mutual aid at all levels. The community that does it. You know, when we say you alone can do it, but you can't do it alone, that's what we mean. We mean the community. So you have to be able to listen. You have to be able to listen without shutting people down. And you talk to each other. For many, many years, I ran a staff support group for nurses and doctors and psychologists in a young person's unit. So they would come every week to talk about their work. And it was really interesting. I did it for about 9 years. And I could begin to tell what sort of difficulties the young people had by the way the staff talked about what was going on, you know. So for instance, if they had a group of young people who had anorexia, you know, not eating, and their job was to stand by that young person for 5 hours, well, 2 hours while they ate a snack. This is the snack. It's one biscuit. And their job is to stand there and encourage the young person to eat the biscuit. And they have to do that 4 times a day, day after day after day. Eat the biscuit. That's your anorexia speaking. It's okay. You need to. Right, your face says it all. What would you feel? You have to do something with that. You have to talk to somebody. You are not a saint. You have these feelings. You have feelings of sadism. Eat the fucking biscuit! Damn it! You have those feelings, and you have to have a place to express them. So hence you can do it in your staff support group, and that's what they did. And then the staff would start talking about their own weight problems and what it felt like to be a morbidly obese man or woman working with an anorectic girl who was that thin. And whether it was a wake-up call to do something about your health, or were you going to keep on stuffing food inside yourself until you die? And the staff could begin to talk about that with each other. And once again, they had to confront issues about listening to young people who had been sexually abused. And they had to listen. And that was another issue. You know, working, the objectification of people like that. That didn't happen in my family. You know, let's try and do this. And let's not objectify that family, that scummy Jippo family. Come on, you're here to nurse these people, to help these people. And they could only do it by, say, for instance, the young woman who said, well, actually, my family was so rigid and so clean and so oppressive to me. That's why I have these feelings. So, and of course, there will be among your populations people who have their own experience of trauma as well, which they may not have talked about. You're not just your residents, your staff, and people need help with that. They have to talk about it at some level to heal. So there's a lovely phrase that I have heard. It's by a bloke called Lionel Shengold. He's written a long book, but you don't need to remember that. Just the idea of soul murder is very important. This is what happens to young people when they have had this experience of early childhood trauma. There is an emotional bondage to the abuser, and finally in their psychic and spiritual annihilation. So they get attached. I don't mean physically attached to the abuser, or sometimes that can happen. The number of women I have worked with who have mothers of appalling wickedness, who have held them down while they've been raped, who have sold them to men, and who sit in front of me and cry because they couldn't find the right birthday card to give to this woman. That's the sort of bondage we get to the abusive figure. And that's the sort of thing we have to work with people so that they can come out the other side of it. Now, many of you won't have seen this, but all of us here, some of us have seen the hope. People can get to the other side of this experience, and the strength can grow. So, but the soul murder is about the spiritual annihilation, and I'll come to it in a minute. A bit more. So, of course, we mustn't forget biology, because we are biological beings, but we mustn't be deterred. Well, I'm not sure. The older I go, the more I think biology is destiny. You know, I'm not so sure. My parents have arthritis. I've got arthritis now. But there is the biological response, and a lot of treatments now focus on the body. Well, actually, they've been doing it for ages. If you've been long enough in the field, as long as I have and this lot have, you will have seen treatments come and go. This one and that one and the next one, and we'll rehash the next one, and this one and that one, and my goodness, it's confusing. And it's necessary, you understand. People have to make a living. People have to make a quick buck. People, have to write the book. We understand that. God bless them. But let's not think they have the truth with their new treatments. So what we do know is the body holds the score. And it's very important if you understand something about this. If you've been repeatedly abused as a child, it upsets your cortisol adrenaline system. It overactivates it. And this is probably a lifetime thing. So that you're always, we respond to fright. I jump. That's natural, we're animals. But the fight or flight response in these children and then these adults is exaggerated. And that's important to remember when you're working. And the lovely way of thinking about it is that this person who's had these experiences is always waiting, always expecting the hammer to fall, the light to go out, the presents to be burnt. That is such a devastating story for people who have had dreadful childhoods. And you will hear it again and again. And every time you hear it, if it doesn't send a shiver through your back, down your back, the hairs on the back of your head go up, please, as I said yesterday, go and drive a lorry. The story about the Christmas that was destroyed, because like many of you now, we are working with intergenerational, the children of people who use. And what happens to the Christmas presents? They get burnt. They get pawned. So this child anticipation, because Santa Claus can fly through the sky, he's magic. This child's anticipation of Christmas is smashed every time. It's terrible. The lover will always leave, and the door, again, we're back into the thresholds, the door will always be shut in your face. That's what people are waiting for. And people are going to have very interesting responses. You know, the number of times I've heard professionals say, oh, well, clearly that terrible experience didn't affect them very much because they said it in a normal voice. They didn't look upset. They're frozen. They're numbed. It's a response. It's a defense. It helps. So, there's a fragile self that develops. Now, many of you, I wanted to talk a bit about deliberate self-harm, but I'm available to talk about it afterwards. But just to explain a little bit about deliberate self-harm, because it's very frightening for people. I know, both for other residents, not so much for members of the community, but somebody who hasn't had any of this experience. It is frightening when you walk into a room and you see blood all over the place, and you see. Where this is coming from is that there is a fragile self. You know, we did that exercise yesterday about the safe place. You know, you remember? The safe place that you go to. You know, my safe place is cleaning out a cupboard. You know, when I'm feeling a bit anxious, you know, I just imagine this cupboard and I imagine the joy that I will have when I take everything out and I put it back in its right place. Bliss, lots of scrubbing, oh joy. That's my safe place. Now, most people who've had difficult experience won't have a safe place. They have an empty space inside them. And that means that when they experience some difficulty, some obstruction, something that you need to talk about and get through, they don't have that inside. They have developed a fascist inside. So what they do, the middle is empty, so they have two. They can either have frustration, feelings of abandonment and rage, which will be expressed either on themselves or to another person. That I said a rude word then with my mouth. Or they will go to, and this is just as important to watch out for among everybody within our communities: admiration, idealization of people. Now, George de Leon is coming to this conference and he'll be here tomorrow. He's here today, but he'll be on tomorrow. Now, it is okay to have George de Leon, the writer of the book, the Red Book, as an idol, a god. You're allowed to do that. This is okay, because he's nearly 90 years old and he is your man, as we say. But you will find that many people, they're vulnerable to people who offer them things, that manipulate them. These people with this terrible background, and they will idealize them. They will fall into cults. They will become members of extreme groups. And they will begin to lose themselves in the certainty of others. And that's why some of these treatments that I know many of you are required to roll out, you know, the EMDR, the anger management, the seeking safety, blah, 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 are difficult because they come from an idea that they're ideal. This works. But they're not. And this has a damaging effect on the people we put into them. Now you might say, aren't you doing the same thing with the therapeutic community? The creative therapeutic community, the good one, that is transformative, has the mechanism to correct itself. through the honesty and the effort of the individuals in it. So, yes, just briefly, people who self-harm, they do it to reduce panic, to establish existence, to stop feeling numb, and to start feeling, to become a human being. What we have to make sure is that we can get them through that to thinking and feeling and talking within the communities before they do themselves any damage. And it can be done. It really can be done. I've worked with so many people who did terrible things to their body. You don't need to know. Or do you? And through talking about themselves and telling their story and have somebody listen, were able to stop doing it. And they didn't need their soothing box to do it with. Although if they were smelly, I told them to go and get a shower. That's the 9-inch nails. Any young rock fans here or middle-aged? You've heard of 9-inch nails? You've heard of their song Hurt? Well, that's really a very good poetic rendition of what it's like if you deliberately self-harm. I hurt myself today to see if I can still feel. That's what it means. And the other thing I want you to remember, and I'm nearly done, so don't worry. The other thing I want you to remember is when you are upset, you cannot think. I was trying to create an acronym for that last night. But it was too late and I was too upset and I couldn't think of one. But why this is important is because often when people tell their stories, we think we have to say something. You know, or we think because we're in a mutual aid situation, we think we have to share our story. But no, that doesn't, because they can't hear. You can't think. When you're upset, when someone's upset, you are with them. You are a witness. And that can be very, very hard to do. But you have to let them be there. You don't get out the tissues and stuff them in their face. You don't do that. You don't start saying, well, I would like you to try your earth breathing exercise. Breathe in from your feet through the earth. And now fire breathe out. And they look at you. Well, I wouldn't, but they look at my colleagues and they look at you and why wouldn't they look at you and think, that person's as mad as a bag of ferrets. Why won't she listen to me? Why does she want me to fire breathe? What is wrong? But the sad thing is that that person has tried to go through the door and you've shut it in their face. You've told them their story cannot be heard. So, you have to listen. I invented a model. It's called the love model. It's very simple. And all it is this. When somebody is telling their story, or starting to tell their story, you listen. That's the listen bit. I didn't do this last night. I did this about 20 years ago. You listen and you observe. Like Naya was saying, you listen to their words and you look at their feet. You observe. You observe. You look. You look at. You don't look like that. You know, I've been saying about space, but you are there in the room. And please remember that people, no matter how upset they were, unless they're really, really psychotic, but I would say even the madman fears the tiger, they know you're there. They know you're there. We're human beings. Remember Harlow's monkeys. People are seeking that safety of the cozy up. They know you're there. And if you can be there and be yourself, okay, your heart may be beating and you may have all these feelings. It's not that you won't have them. What I'm saying, it's legitimate for you to have them. As long as you don't do, run out of the room, which I have seen people do. So you observe, and that gives you something to do as well. And you make noises, don't you? I mean, I do. And I have had feedback later on from people saying, well, I knew you were there because you kept saying, yeah, okay. And then somebody saying, when they got a little bit further on, do you know what? Stop saying, It's great. And you verbalise. You do not do the whole thing of, I know what's happening with you. I know what's wrong. It's because of this and because of that. You let people find their way to it. All you need to say is little questions that show you want them to go on. Or the question, do you want to say some more? Do you want to talk about it? You empathise. Now, empathy and explore a little bit. Go in. You feel it. It's right that you feel. It's right that you feel. You will. You'll feel it. Because in analysis, just in case anybody wants to talk about it later, we call it transference and counter-transference, but you don't need to worry about it. You will feel it. You will feel things being projected in you, and you need to metabolize them, and everybody in the community needs to. But let me tell you, most people have had some of this experience. So as the last thing, remember, courage can be as infectious as fear. It's very important. The courage that the woman has in coming along, trying to get free of her addiction, and then sitting down with somebody in a safe place and starting to say, look what happened to me, look what I've done. Not only was I sexually abused, but I abused my brother. To be able to sit down and tell that story and grow through it. She has the courage, and courage can be infectious for everybody. And the last one is this quote, which I'll read, which is, I've heard the maidens singing each to each. The mermaids singing each to each. I do not think they will sing to me or I to them. Now I put that up there because for me, it might not be for you, but maybe you can find a piece of stylized writing for yourself. And all the people who have these things do as well. People who go to AA love the AA quotes, whatever. Because they might sound like a cliche, but sometimes in a storm, you can hold on to them. I like this because this, for me, expresses something about what the excluded person and the excluded population feels. That they have heard the mermaids singing. They have seen people on TV with money. They have seen people on TV enjoying themselves, having a drink, going, oh, they've seen it. They've seen people with mums and dads and everything. They have heard the mermaids singing, each to each, but they feel excluded from it. They do not feel that the mermaids will ever sing to them, ever, or that they can sing to the mermaids. Yet, we know that the therapeutic community, whatever its faults, when it's working at its best, can provide an environment where these sorts of experiences, this experience of being excluded from the good things, can be worked through and another identity created.